looked at a Xenomorph and thought, this needs more firepower? No? I mean, no normal human would, right? But Weyland Yutani is not made of normal humans. At least, not their top brass, whoever they are. So they were like, let's make the Xenomorphs more powerful. And that's how we got the Xenoborg, a cybernetically enhanced xenomorph that was introduced to us in the 1999 Aliens vs. Predator PC game. This upgraded biomechanical minion of hell is the lovechild of alien biology and heavy machinery. Still, more importantly, this is the kind of beast you get when a shady, power-hungry corporation tries to build the ultimate alien super soldier. Despite only featuring prominently in one video game, the Xenoborg has a rich, albeit bizarre lore behind it. And in this video, we'll explore the Xenoborg's origins, anatomy, in-game behavior, weaknesses, and its appearances, as well as the comic book inspirations that went into its creation. But before I begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. Origins of the Xenoborg. The Xenoborg's story started in the late 22nd century, when Weyland Yutani decided to create the ultimate living weapon. And if we know one thing about Weyland Yutani as a corporation, it's that it never shies away from using super questionable science to further their nefarious agenda, and the creation of this monstrosity was no different. The concept was to take a xenomorph, which is already one of the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, and enhance it with machinery to bring to life a near unstoppable super soldier or bioweapon. The project was completed in the year 2189 on the USS Adobenus, a Weyland Yutani space station that orbited Acheron, or LV-426. In essence, if a regular xenomorph is something that will hunt you till you die, a cybernetic xenomorph will do it with much more precision, and it would be harder to kill, which of course is exactly why Weyland Yutani pursued it. At least 3 prototype Xenoborgs were developed on the Adobenus station, and each of these were initially intended as a security measure against a xenomorph infestation that had broken out there. In theory, turning the Xeno against its own kind with some human-made upgrades might have seemed clever. In practice, the newly minted Xenoborgs had a very simple approach to security. That is, attack absolutely everything in sight. Once activated, these cyborg Xenos did not discriminate between friend or foe. They were programmed to engage any life form that crossed their path. This predictability went about as well as you'd expect. The rampaging prototypes ended up being destroyed by a Colonel Marine, who is basically the player character in the Marine campaign and is identified in lore as Private Anderson during the station's desperate cleanup operation. So the grand debut of Weyland Yutani's cyborg enforcers basically turned into a chaotic shootout, with the controlled bioweapons trying to kill their own creators. Despite that rough start, the Xenoborg's existence was proof of concept enough that a few more found their way into service as terrifying guard dogs. In the Aliens vs. Predator game's storyline, we encounter Xenoborgs not only on the Adobenus station, but also later on a colonial marine base. In one incident, 2 Xenoborgs were destroyed inside a United States colonial marine-controlled xenomorph research habitat, assigned to guard the entrance of a captive alien hive. Because nothing says secure containment like a couple of cyborg xenomorphs at the door. This plan didn't end much better when a Predator warrior infiltrated the facility on a trophy hunt for the Xeno Queen, and the Xenoborg guards were quickly taken out along with the rest of the base's defenses. It turns out that even a cybernetic alien is no match for a determined Yautja with a mission. Anatomy and design. So what exactly is a Xenoborg, physically speaking? In short, it's a hybrid of flesh and steel, a xenomorph warrior whose body has been augmented with heavy mechanical implants. It's a standard black Xeno, but it's festooned with armor plating, wiring, and weapon systems, until it's more cyborg tank than the slithering alien you and I know. The Xenoborg's design is described as a fusion of organic and mechanical components into one horrific living weapon. Its thin, supple, yet graceful biomechanical body is reinforced with heavy metal exoskeleton parts. It means that the Weyland Yutani guys sacrificed the Xeno's natural agility for sheer durability and strength. This extensive augmentation includes an armored carapace, which is strong enough to shrug off most gunfire and, most notably, integrated laser weaponry. In fact, the Xenoborg is literally armed to the teeth, or more precisely to the arms, with powerful laser cannons mounted as part of its body. These are are twin laser emitters, one on each arm in the game model, that can spew deadly energy blasts, all guided by a targeting system built right into the creature's head. If the idea of a xenomorph with laser sights sounds like overkill, that's because it absolutely is. Despite the metal plating and hardware, it retains the biomechanical look of a xenomorph, just with a lot more gadgetry under the blood. But this was all about the exterior. How does the Xenoborg look on the inside? Well, no one dissected it and clicked a picture, but we know that the Xenoborg's organic systems are interwoven with cybernetic control mechanisms. For example, the creature's head houses a control node and laser targeting apparatus, which effectively gives it a built-in eye for aiming those lasers. The augmentation is pretty advanced too, so much so that it even adds entirely new features a normal alien wouldn't have. I must note here that the early versions of Xenomorphs were supposed to have actual eyes. In fact, in Necronomicon 4 by H.R. Giger, the piece of art which became the basis for Xenomorphs, the creature had visible dark eyes, but they were later removed to give the creatures a more mysterious and otherworldly look. However, the eyes came back when they created the Xenoborg. Anyway, all this added metal and machinery make the Xenoborg heavier and sturdier than a typical alien. Its body is encased in a chrome-like alloy exoskeleton in places and reinforced bones, which means small arms fire pings off it with minimal effect. The upside is that it can soak up damage like nobody's business. The downside, for the Xenoborg at least, is that all that heavy gear makes it slow and unwieldy compared to its purely organic brethren. A normal xenomorph might leap across a room in a flash, but a Xenoborg, on the other hand, lumbers with a mechanical gait and pretty much trades speed and agility for firepower and durability. This makes it clear that the Xenoborg's anatomy was engineered only for combat domination. From its reinforced claws, ready to tear apart close-range targets, to the coolant tubes and power cables likely snaking through its limbs, everything about the Xenoborg screams bioengineered war machine. Although it hasn't been confirmed, I'm assuming that the creature presumably retains the acidic blood that all Xenos have. I mean, why remove a creature's built-in acid defense when you can instead imagine the fun of that acid mixing with electronics? I hope Weyland Yutani thought that one through, and it's probably in there. Wait, am I like rooting for the Xenoborg? That's strange. All told, the Xenoborg's design answers a question nobody should have asked. How do you make a xenomorph even more dangerous? But someone answered, give it lasers and armor. Behavior and abilities. On the battlefield, Xenoborgs are definitely terrifying, but the upside for us— see, I am rooting for the humans again. Yeah, so the upside for us is that its actions on the battlefield are a bit predictable as well. These cyborg Xenos function as living turrets, and they often serve a stationary defensive role, like holding key positions rather than prowling around like regular aliens. Once activated, a Xenoborg requires a brief startup period to come fully online, kind of like a machine booting up. During this period, it might stand idle with its systems powering up, but that really doesn't mean that you should get too comfortable. You see, as soon as those red targeting sensors become active, the Xenoborg gets ready to make its kills. I've already mentioned earlier that speed is not the Xenoborg's forte, due to all that added bulk, of course. In fact, if you keep your distance, you might notice it trundling along at a fixed and rather deliberate pace, more like a tank or something than a soldier. This limited mobility often kept Xenoborgs near wherever they were deployed, for example, guarding a door or corridor, rather than chasing enemies down hallways. All of this makes me think that a Xenoborg might not bother giving chase if you ran far enough, and would definitely prefer to hold its ground. So yeah, despite all that lethality, the Xenoborg does show a small amount of unintended mercy for any soldier smart enough to retreat. What the Xenoborg lacks in agility, however, it more than makes up for in firepower and toughness. Once fully online, its twin laser blasts become capable of killing a human or even a hardened Yautja in mere seconds if they're caught in the open. These lasers are high-intensity energy weapons, and these are the things that form the Xenoborg's most potent offensive weapons. The targeting system in its head allows the Xenoborg to lock onto victims pretty accurately, and paints them with a laser sight before frying them to a crisp. I'm not sure if you've played the Aliens vs. Predator video game from 1999, but for many players, their first encounter with a Xenoborg went something like walk into a room, hear a mechanical whir, and suddenly get hit by what feels like a truck made of pure energy. Surprise! In terms of behavior, Xenoborgs show simple but relentless aggression. Their programming, or perhaps warped instinct drives them to open fire at any moving target on sight. Needless to say, these brutes don't care a great deal about any kind of strategy or intimidation tactics, so they won't stalk you or hide like their natural brethren. A Xenoborg just powers up, gets its way into line of sight, and starts shooting. As I mentioned earlier, they don't discriminate on the basis of color, race, religion, or species. So you may be a human, a predator, or a Xenomorph cousin, the Xenoborg will cheerfully attempt to murder your unfortunate ass out of this world. This led to some spectacularly messed up incidents, like the Adobenus Station 1, where the Xenoborgs turned on all nearby life forms and Private Anderson had to eliminate them. In technical terms, the concept of friend or foe doesn't really apply, and one could say their AI is as subtle as a brick. Despite their straightforward attack behavior, Xenoborgs were incredibly effective in combat, at least for short periods, thanks to their resilience. Small arms fire, rifles, pistols, even the Predator's lighter plasma shots tend to just bounce off or mildly annoy a Xenoborg. These cybernetic Goliaths can tank an absurd amount of punishment without slowing down. In the game, this is the enemy that soaks up entire ammo clips with little effect, forcing players to switch to heavier gear. It's no wonder the Xenoborg was considered one of the most peculiar and formidable Xenomorph variants in the AVP universe. Interestingly, Xenoborgs also had a limitation that wasn't immediately apparent in combat, and it was their lack of intelligence. All those cybernetic modifications left them with minimal independent thinking, and they essentially operated like drones following their programming. It's not like the Xenomorph drones have much of an independent will because they are controlled by the Xenomorph Queen, but she only directs them to do things. When it comes to how they should do such things, the drone uses its own mind and independent thinking, and that's how they could beat most humans. On the other hand, a Xenoborg won't try any clever flanking or adaptive tactics. However, we should know that the Xenoborgs are not too high on intelligence. In fact, you compare a Xenoborg's intelligence to that of a dog's. In practical terms, this meant a smart opponent could exploit their predictable behavior. Colonial Marines and many happy predators can take them easily. But you know what? The Xenoborgs had a very unintentional strength to them. They were so power-hungry, and I mean in the literal electrical sense, that they could even wreak havoc on computers. How, you ask? Well, back in 1999, when your PCs are 1/100th of your current smartphones in terms of performance, if you installed Aliens vs. Predator on a slower PC, you'd encounter a lag in your system because of the Xenoborg's effects and performance requirements. This would weaken your system and sometimes shut your game itself, allowing the Xenoborg to win or forcing you to start another round. I think it's safe to say that if the Xenoborg didn't kill your in-game character, it might have killed your frame rate. Needless to say, modern systems laugh that off, but I thought it was a fun bit of trivia and I should share it with you. Weaknesses and how to beat a Xenoborg. Given their armor, firepower, and ferocity, do Xenoborgs have any weaknesses? Absolutely. A few, in fact, if you know where to look and shoot. First and foremost, heavy firepower is the name of the game when dealing with a Xenoborg. Standard issue rifles and pulse rounds barely scratch these cyborgs. The Colonial Marines quickly discovered that nothing short of explosives or high-caliber ordnance would put a dent in a Xenoborg's metal hide. In the game, the recommended remedy for a Xenoborg problem is the M83 Sadar, essentially a portable rocket launcher. One or two well-placed rockets from a Sadar will blow a Xenoborg to bits. Anything less, and you're just decorating its exoskeleton with bullet holes. Marines also found some success with experimental ordnances like the Skeeter launcher, another anti-tank style weapon. The key is to hit these monsters hard. But while we're on the subject, let's explore the M83 Sadar, which is a very mean piece of weapon. The M83A2 Sadar is basically a portable, one-shot anti-armor weapon that was designed to take out enemy vehicles at distances up to a full kilometer. It's lightweight, effective, and fully disposable, which means that once you've fired it, you can discard the entire launcher. So this fire-and-forget missile locks onto the target and guides itself to the target, and thus it's simple to use but exceedingly accurate. The launch tube is made of carbon fiber, which ensures durability while keeping it super lightweight, and the mission's guidance system is placed in an aluminum launch tube. To fire the Sadar, the operator unlatches a forward ring on the blast tube, pulls the inner tube forward until it locks into place, then you move on to the thermal sight and trigger assembly. After pressing a button to activate the system, the weapon is ready to aim and fire from the shoulder. Once launched, the rocket accelerates pretty fast and targets the hottest part of the enemy vehicle, which is usually the engine deck of a tank. In fact, the warhead is capable of piercing light to medium armor. There are a few variants of the stuff as well, but maybe we can talk about that in another video. Coming back to the Xenoborg weaknesses, predators, for their part, have their own solutions. A seasoned Yautja hunter can kill, or rather destroy, a Xenoborg by exploiting its slow reaction time and aiming for critical points. They could use the Smart Disc, which is a sharp enough flying blade that can cleave through tough armor. A smart disc hurled at a Xenoborg's center of mass can potentially slice off important bits, like, say, its arms, and for a Xenoborg, no arms means no lasers. I think the smart disc can even decapitate the creature if aimed well, yeah? What do you think? In fact, precise targeting is another viable strategy. You see, a Xenoborg has a conspicuous control node or power core visible on its cranium. This might present as a flashing light or panel, sort of an Achilles heel built into its head. Hitting that spot with a sniper round or plasma caster bolt can short-circuit the Xenoborg, shutting it down almost instantly. Of course, pulling that off in the heat of battle with lasers flying at your face is easier said than done. But yeah, a shot to the head is possibly the quickest way to slay the beast. It's also worth noting that Xenoborgs, being part machine, can potentially fall victim to things that typically plague electronics, electrical surges, EMP-type weapons, or simply disrupting the remote control signal can neutralize them. Livermore Evstons' Augmented Alien Warriors, the predecessors to Xenoborgs. The Xenoborgs' claim to fame is its appearance in the 1999 Aliens vs. Predator video game, but the idea of cybernetically enhanced xenomorphs didn't start or end there. In fact, a very similar concept was introduced in the Alien Expanded Universe a few years earlier, and it likely served as inspiration for the game's Xenoborgs. The 1994 novel Aliens vs. Predator: Hunter's Planet features a storyline about augmented xenomorphs that could almost be Xenoborg cousins. In the novel, a wealthy and psychotic entrepreneur named Livermore Evston, who is secretly affiliated with Weyland Yutani, sets up shop on a planet called Blior, which he calls his own Hunter's Planet, and proceeds to create an army of cybernetic alien warriors. Evston's goal is nothing so modest as galactic domination, as he plans to use these augmented aliens as conquerors, crushing any predators, humans, or other beings that stand in his way. In other words, he's literally the mad scientist archetype who looked at xenomorphs and thought, needs more cyborg. Sound familiar? Evston's augmented xenomorph warriors share many traits with the Xenoborgs we know. He captured xenomorph specimens by possibly cloning them from a queen taken from the colony on Ryushi, and then he proceeded to modify them both genetically and cybernetically. These mutants were larger and stronger than typical aliens, and they sported a variety of mechanical enhancements. For instance, each had a control implant in its head, which gave Evston direct control over them through remote radio signals. They were also fitted with armor plating and given extra appendages to help them wield weapons. Yes, actual weapons in their hands, or extra hands. These guys were basically huge cyborg aliens with multiple arms, some leaning toward a queen-like build, each arm clutching a different weapon, from futuristic blasters to spears and knives grafted into their clutches. In fact, there was a lack of uniformity in their shapes and sizes. What I mean is that some variants were bulkier, some had more human-like eyes grafted on to improve their vision, and others had spiky extensions on different head shapes. I like to collectively call them the Army of Frankenxenos, each a bit unique, but all deadly. Hey, speaking of Frankenstein, did you catch the new trailer? For one, it's being directed by Guillermo del Toro and stars people like Oscar Isaac, Christopher Waltz, and even Game of Thrones veterans like Charles Dance and David Bradley. Some people are saying it's too good for Netflix, and I kind of agree. A movie of this scale should be released in the theaters. You with me? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, coming back to Evston's creatures, in terms of behavior, the novel's augmented aliens showed the pros and cons of this cybernetic approach. While Evston kept them under direct control, they acted like mindless drones, slow, plodding, and not very tactically sharp. Their movements were described as robotic, lacking the eerie grace that normal xenomorphs have. In fact, the predators who eventually fought them noticed that these cyborg aliens were sluggish and clumsy when being remote piloted, so much so that agile fighters could dodge their blows and outmaneuver them fairly easily. Evston essentially traded away the xenomorph's instincts for the promise of control, and it made his creations less effective in combat. However, that all changed when things went awry, as they inevitably do in alien lore. During the climax of Hunter's Planet, Evston's control over his cyber army was disrupted. His command network failed, and suddenly the augmented Xenomorphs were free of his control. At that moment, their natural alien instincts kicked in once more, and the creatures went from slow zombies to feral killing machines in an instant. Machiko Noguchi, the protagonist, a human allied with predators, witnessed the cyborg aliens suddenly move with a speed that Machiko had never before witnessed, tearing apart anything in their way. They became far more dangerous, uncontrolled, but also unpredictable. Some tried to escape and find shelter once freed, operating on pure survival instinct. Essentially, Evstons' grand army backfired spectacularly. The predators, who had teamed up with Machiko, took advantage of the chaos and started methodically hunting down the rampaging cyborg Xenos. In the end, all of Evstons' 21 augmented aliens were destroyed, either blown up by their own failsafes or picked off by the hunters. Machiko and her allies even cornered Evston himself and forced him to give up the shutdown codes, which resulted in the remaining cyborgs' heads exploding like overripe watermelons. Suffice to say, Evston's dreams of a cyborg xenomorph empire died with him. Quite literally, a predator elder made sure the villain didn't survive the encounter. So yeah, that was all in this one, guys. See you around. See you around.